Welcome to this explainer. If you're an HR professional, a department manager, or even a business owner doing your own hiring, you already know that finding the absolute right talent is just critical. Well, today we're unpacking a highly detailed, incredibly practical guide that's going to completely transform how you approach recruitment. We are moving way past just scanning resumes and getting right into the strategic science of the interview. So let's kick things off with a seemingly simple question. Who is the best candidate? It sounds straightforward, right? But as our source material points out, if you go around and ask your colleagues this, you'll probably get vastly different answers. Is the ideal hire the person who just perfectly executes whatever is asked of them? Are they the super charismatic team player everyone instantly loves? Or maybe they're the strategic innovator, the one who spots weaknesses and builds completely new solutions. Look, before anyone even sits down at the interview table, we have to define exactly which of these best profiles we're actually hunting for. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the essence of interviews, followed by the four main types. Then, the recruitment workflow, screening candidates, mastering the questions, and finally, evaluating success. Section 1, the essence of interviews. Okay, we really need to fundamentally shift our mindset here from a simple Q&A session into a highly strategic conversation. A job interview is absolutely not an interrogation. It's a process of mutual discovery. While you are sitting there evaluating their professional and personal traits, they are simultaneously exploring your company's culture, the scale of your operation, and the very real expectations of the role. And the text makes a really fascinating point about this. The interview doesn't just end when the candidate walks out the door. The way you manage this very first conversation literally signals your communication and leadership style as their potential future employer. Moving on to Section 2, 4 types of interviews. Knowing that we're aiming for a mutual exploration, there are 4 distinct structural frameworks we can use to actually run these meetings. First up is the individual interview. That classic one-on-one setup heavily relied upon by small businesses, where the owner might also be the hiring manager. Then we've got the committee, or panel interview, which brings multiple perspectives into the room all at once. Next is the sequential interview. Now, the crucial thing to remember about sequential interviews is that candidates are passed from one evaluator to the next in step-by-step rounds. Because the evaluators aren't in the same room together, this requires highly accurate, really well-designed tracking forms to pass notes between the stages. And finally, we have the group interview, where multiple candidates are evaluated together so you can instantly test their teamwork dynamics. And you know, the responsibility for this whole process doesn't fall solely on human resources. A truly robust selection involves the department managers who requested the hire, the general manager, and sometimes even external consultants, which is especially true when you're assessing candidates for specialized or senior executive roles. It's a total collaborative effort. All right, Section 3, the recruitment workflow. So you know the types of interviews you can run, and you know who needs to be in the room. But where does the actual face-to-face meeting sit within the larger hiring machine? Well, selection and recruitment is a fully integrated workflow. It starts wide with your job announcements and preliminary screening of applications. The personal interview, sitting there at step 3, is really the critical hinge of this entire process. But notice it doesn't end there. The interview is nestled right between that initial screening and the vital background checks and final employment decisions. Because at the end of the day, building a strong, cohesive, and potentially even global professional team requires a meticulously structured pipeline. You're filtering a massive pool of talent down to the absolute best fit, and every single step in that workflow acts as a vital quality control checkpoint. Next up, Section 4, screening and scheduling candidates. Before we jump into the fun stuff, the interview questions themselves, let's talk about exactly what has to happen before a candidate even steps into the building. Preparation is literally everything. The source guide heavily emphasizes the necessity of rigorous documentation during the screening phase. Using a streamlined candidate classification grid helps you quickly categorize outcomes when you're processing dozens of applicants at once. Did they pass the initial screen? Did they withdraw? Were they uncooperative during scheduling? Did they refuse the final offer, or were they successfully hired? Tracking these outcomes meticulously ensures nothing falls through the cracks, leaving you with a very clear historical record of your applicant pool. And the logistics of scheduling are just as crucial. You absolutely must provide candidates with sufficient time to prepare, really clear instructions on the location, and a list of any documents they need to bring. Why does this matter so much? Because a properly notified and prepared candidate is going to be much more relaxed and authentic, and that yields a far more accurate evaluation of what they can actually do. Which brings us to Section 5, Mastering the Interview Questions. Now we're zooming all the way into the micro level. When you are sitting face-to-face, you need to ask targeted questions spanning multiple categories. Everything from analyzing past successes and failures to probing their creativity, their educational takeaways, their long-term goals, and how they handle really complex challenges. For instance, assessing a candidate's risk tolerance is absolutely vital in modern, fast-paced businesses where innovation actually requires a bit of daring. By asking the risk question, what risks have you taken recently to complete a specific task, you completely bypass those rehearsed cookie-cutter answers. It forces the candidate to give you a real-world example of their willingness to push boundaries to get the job done. Next up is the motivation question. Are you competitive, and what are 2 things that motivate you at work? This one is brilliant because it helps you determine exactly what drives the person sitting across from you. Are they fueled by hitting targets, by financial rewards, or maybe by internal challenges and recognition? If their core motivations don't actually align with what your company offers, even a highly skilled candidate will eventually burn out or walk away. And that builds directly into the more intense phase of the interview, the hard question. The source guide specifically lists this pretty bold example. Have you ever been in a position to fire someone? Why did you fire them? You aren't just asking about their history here. You are checking to see how they handle difficult, friction-heavy workplace decisions. How they explain a past firing tells you volumes about their empathy, their professional boundaries, and exactly how they operate under extreme pressure. Finally, consider the environment question. How do you handle criticism generally, and what was the most frustrating part of your last job? This behavioral inquiry probes directly into their adaptability. Look, every work environment has stress. By asking what frustrated them previously, you can very quickly assess whether the natural day-to-day environment of your company is going to trigger those exact same frustrations. And our final section, number 6, evaluating candidate success. So we've asked the tough questions. Now it's time for the final stage, taking all these answers and determining who actually fits the role and your company's future. Evaluation is this delicate balancing act. On one hand, you absolutely must ruthlessly filter out anyone who lacks the minimum practical and academic standards. But interestingly, the text warns us to also carefully evaluate those whose qualifications far exceed the current job's needs. An overqualified candidate might quickly become bored, unmotivated, or view your role as just a temporary stepping stone. Evaluation isn't just about finding the highest skills possible, it's about finding the precise fit for the specific vacancy. Which brings us to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Are you just trying to fill an empty desk? Or are you using the interview as a strategic tool to discover the exact human traits your company needs to thrive? By shifting from an interrogation to a mutual exploration, carefully structuring your process, and asking the targeted questions we covered today, you can transform your next hiring cycle from a frustrating chore into a massive competitive advantage. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and best of luck with your next round of interviews.